I thought, that is so ridiculous. Who the hell would fall over like that coming out of a shower? And the moment I hit the floor, I thought, oh my gosh, just like that ACC ad. But in terms of what music can provide, I always believe not just music, but the arts itself is another way of expression, of advocating, of providing a message that could really represent our disabled community in an artistic way to get the message across.
Welcome to Generations of Change. I'm Áine Kely-costello, a young blind journalist and advocate known for my delight in asking endless questions. I mainly grew up in the 2000s, and I vividly remember the camaraderie of being at camps with other blind kids and teens. In the real world at school, I was surrounded by sighted people. I was a good student, but I remember the shame I felt when a teacher asked me why I was sitting alone at lunch, and the frustration of having to fight to be in the jazz band just because I couldn't see. While at uni, I stumbled into a role advocating for accessibility law. Suddenly, it was my job to connect with and empower other disabled people to be part of a call for change, and I had to find the courage to build relationships with a whole lot of virtual strangers. That job would end up bringing me into community and solidarity with students, writers, academics, business people, and advocates of all ages. Disability was our shared experience, and together we would champion change. Our efforts built on decades of leadership from disabled people. But how was it growing up disabled 40 or 50 years ago, or acquiring disability as an adult? How has Aotearoa changed? How has it not? What unplanned moments would shape the lives of the visionary disabled people who dedicated themselves to making inclusion the norm? Join me for one of 7 conversations where both of us get to find out. Malo Pati, it's really lovely to have the chance to talk to you today. Could you introduce yourself for me, just say a little bit about who you are, where you come from?
Sure. My name is Pati Umaga. I'm from a little suburb called Nainai, or that's where I live now, and in the Hutt Valley in the Wellington region, and I was actually born and raised in Wainiomata.
Cool. So do you want to talk a little bit about what were sort of the influences on you growing up?
Sure. Both my parents came from Samoa in the early 50s, and they settled in Wellington, and then we moved out to Wainiomata when we were really young, and I was raised there and went to school there, did all my schooling in Wainiomata, and basically brought up in our church background and also a bit of sport. And then my father decided that we were going to be musicians. And so he got my brothers and I to form a family band, and that's how I got into music. So otherwise I would have been right into my sport, and I think I could have made the All Blacks. But now I ended up doing music. We ended up getting involved in the music scene in Wellington, and I ended up playing in a band called the Holiday Makers way back in the 80s, and we had a hit single called Sweet Lovers that went number 1 for about 6 weeks and was Song of the Year. And so I ended up getting to kind of enrolled in the music industry at another level. So music has been a really big part of my journey in my life. So
cool. And what do you play?
I play the bass guitar, yeah.
I feel like bass is quite underappreciated, right? Because without a good bass line, there's just something missing.
I have to agree with you, because that's why they say that the bass guitar links the drummer with all the other instruments and keeps the rhythm going. And so, yeah.
Awesome, yep. So when you were growing up, am I right in thinking you didn't have a disability at that point?
That's right, yeah. I was a walker back in the day, so when I was growing up, yeah, I was, just another island boy and doing all the things that young guys were doing back in the day, and but I kind of ended up being a bit of a rebel, being the black sheep of the family, and I used to run away from home and go out and hang out with a lot of people that, especially people that were in the gangs back then. So, but my father, when I ran away from home one time, my father caught me in the mall, and back in those days there was no anti-smacking bill, so my father ended up giving me a beating in front of all my friends and shipped me on a plane to Samoa, and ended up as a 15-year-old living in Samoa for a year. Got to see where my parents all came, you know, what their background was, and really appreciated that, and that's really helped me to kind of have a bit of bit more understanding and stronger ties with my culture, my Samoan background.
Was there also, did you play a lot of music while you were over there as well, within that culture?
When you're 15 and you go to a place like Samoa and you seem to be a novelty, then there's quite a bit of attention on you, especially from women. So I ended up having to, you know, kind of play the field as such, and just kind of strut my stuff, because I was this guy from New Zealand, and you know, we were quite a rarity over there, so I took advantage of that quite a bit. So no, I didn't really have music in the fore, you know, in terms of what I was wanting to do. But
I guess it gave you a bit of a path after that, right? As you left school and as you know, got into that band scene, and it gave you something to do and something that would stay with you then ultimately.
Absolutely.
For many years to come.
Absolutely. It was the thing about the family band that we had. We were called Kabasa, and we were there. We were doing a lot of eclectic styles of music, but we were doing both mainstream and Pacific music at the same time. So, and we were playing to audiences that weren't just Pacific. You know, we were doing a lot of protesting, and we were all kind of radicals back in the day, and we used to do a lot of gigs that were playing to a lot of diverse communities. So yeah.
Did you ever play to the disability community back in the day then?
No, I never really had any contact with the disabled community at all. And the only time I ever did was when a friend of mine, we were at school together, and I never knew what happened to him, but he just disappeared from school one year, and I didn't know what he was doing. And then I suddenly bumped into him a few years later, and he was in a wheelchair. And and he told me that when he was 18, he dove off the Petone Wharf into the sea and broke his neck, and was in a wheelchair. And but that was only after about the second or third time I'd seen him, because the first time I saw him, I didn't know what to say, how to approach him, and I was feeling quite uncomfortable. So I just kind of crossed the road and just carried on walking. But then we bumped into each other again, and that's when I first had a conversation with him, and it kind of helped to break down a lot of stereotypical kind of thoughts that I had in my head about being disabled.
Could you share what some of those kind of things that would have gone through your head might have been? Like, did you think that it would be harder to like, you know, get your friendship back maybe?
So I thought that because he was in a chair, that it wasn't just his physical body that was that I saw as having a disability, but I thought that his mind was as well. And because of that, I just thought, oh, maybe he's got some mental issues as well. So, you know, it just kind of, that's the kind of attitude, I guess, that I had back then was. So it wasn't until I had my own accident, and he was one of the ones that kept coming around to my place and trying to bolster me up and keeping the conversations going and connecting me with people, and so cool. I thought it was quite a bit of irony in that.
Yep. And so tell me a little bit more about that.
Okay, so in 2005, on May 26, 8:10 a.m, I was in the shower, and then I went to pick up the shampoo, and I flipped out of the bathtub and landed on the floor, and the back of my head hit the wall, took all my weight, and and then it snapped and cracked, and then I knew I was in trouble. So I think I was on adrenaline after that, because my brother came in and helped me up, and I finished my shower and rang work and told them I'll be late and I was going to go to the hospital. And I went to drive myself, and then I thought, I better not drive myself. I think my brother, he drove me, and it wasn't until I went to the emergency ward and told them that I'd fallen and cracked my neck, and then at the moment they put the brace around my neck. I mean, I did ask if they had a 54-inch neck brace, but they didn't, and so what they had, they put around my neck, and the moment they did that, I collapsed and I couldn't feel my legs.
Can you remember some of the, what went through your head when you initially realised that you are probably going to be paralysed?
Yeah, funnily enough, what I thought of the moment I felt that crack and knew that I'd done something was, I thought about this TV advertisement that ACC always show, where the guy comes out of the shower and he's got a towel around himself and he kind of slips over and cracks his head on the base of the shower. And I used to mock that ad. I thought, that is so ridiculous. Who the hell would fall over like that coming out of a shower? And the moment I hit the floor, I thought, oh my gosh, just like that ACC ad. And that was all I could think of at the time. So,
how did the ACC ad end?
Oh, it just ends showing this person lying on the floor, and he's like, I wasn't sure, he was like, he's unconscious, and he's just like got blood coming out the back of his head or something. So
we're not showing someone, getting back into the community and getting lots of support.
All around injury prevention, And I just thought, oh gosh. So, and I always had it in my head that I'd be still walking in a couple of weeks. So I had a few firsts in that, going into the hospital, and I actually thought I was going to die. And so my brothers and I, before I went into the operating theatre that night to get operated on, I thought I was going to die, and my brothers and I were kind of holding each other and crying and sharing our last kind of goodbyes, So it was, but came through the operation all right, and I ended up having my first ever helicopter ride, because they decided to send me to Auckland, the spinal unit in Auckland. So there was a helicopter waiting for me on the roof of the Wellington Hospital, and then got stretchered into the helicopter, and we had to fly all the way to Auckland, but we had to stop at New Plymouth for refuel, and then the pilot decided to tip his helicopter sideways to show me the top of Mount Taranaki. So it was quite a experience then, and so got to Middlemore Hospital and transferred off the stretcher to the spinal unit that was based out in Aotearoa. And so I was thinking, oh great, I'll be there for a couple of weeks and I'll come running back out again.
And do you think that the way that, people often view disability and society often views disability is that it's kind of a place you really, really don't want to be, to the extent that, the best solution is always the medically getting kind of fixed solution, if you like?
To be honest, I always thought that was the end of my life. I always had, and I think people around us in our community always think that once you're in a wheelchair, that's the end of your life. So it's that stigma that I had in my head, that perception that I had in my head, that I always thought that that's what would happen, basically.
Can you think of some of the things that helped to, over time, to turn that around? You mentioned your school friend who was now a wheelchair user coming around and talking to you.
Well, it actually took me probably a good 2 to 3 years to get over that, even though I had people coming in and supporting me. But to me, it was all about pity, about feeling sorry for me being in that position and not being able to really do anything else other than offer some moral support. So, and that made me even more self-conscious about being disabled, and then I never wanted to go out or see friends or go out and kind of just have a social visit with people, my family. And along with that, it was the whole thing around wanting to find other ways to give you that escape. And so it was drugs and drinking and basically sitting with my remote control and Sky and computer, and that was my life. You know. So it took a while to get out of that, but eventually I started to get involved in some of the community stuff, advocacy stuff.
What sorts of things got you, that you were involved in initially that helped you to get back out and seeing people again and realising that you could not need to feel ashamed or embarrassed about going out of the house?
So I'd done a lot of, since I left school, I worked in community development doing youth work, working with street kids quite a lot. And I knew that there were ways of getting over things like depression or just trying to, heal your soul as such in terms of making a pathway to recovery. So I knew I needed a lot of counselling, and I managed to get that. And I think also because I realised that I get more than what other people with disability would normally get. People who come, basically who are disabled through accidents or through injury, they basically get resourced, they get funding, a high level of funding, and equipment supplied, support provided, that basically is, they don't have to be assessed for it in terms of like what people who are disabled through disease or through specific impairment coming through the Ministry of Health Systems. There's a huge disparity between both MOH and ACC.
For sure. And the equipment that you do get though that's the sort of thing that it would be great if everyone would have access to the funding to be able to meet their disability specific needs, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that is an injustice, and it should well be that we all get the same, regardless of whether you have an impairment or through illness or through injury. Yeah.
Yep. So tell me about some of the advocacy that you've done in the crossover space between Pasifika and disabled people, and why that's really important to you.
Well, what I've come to know about my community is as much as we love our disabled community, or the disabled family members, our community still looks at disability through a medical model and not through the social model. So it is about us being broken, and some of us are told that we're disabled because we're cursed because our family did something way back in the day that was wrong, and that's the price that we're paying for it. So. And sometimes as disabled people through our communities, we're just kept at home. We're not, going out or anything like that just because it's like an embarrassment or shame to the family. Those are some of the stereotypical kind of attitudes that came through for our Pacific cultures. But I can see that the changes are starting to happen. But it's about how we get out there, portray ourselves to encourage leadership, positivity, to let people know that even if we are disabled, but our bodies might be broken, but our minds aren't, or our spirit isn't, and we can still lead as normal lives as we can. But it just also needs a change of attitude, because what we're starting to understand now is that it's our society that also creates the barriers that maintain our disabilities, or they call it ableism. At the same time, build up the capabilities of our disabled people, especially our young people, so they can be the leaders and carry on their advocacy and just doing what they do to participate and contribute. Awesome.
Yep. So that was then your sort of, with your youth work hat on, bringing that, that expertise that you would have had into the advocacy space as well.
Ultimately, our journey was to try and establish a Pacific disabled persons organisation, a DPO. So we've gotten to the point where we have done that now. We have called ourselves Mana Moana Pacifica. And we want to be able to lead our own change and contribute to high-level strategic, and governance programs and what is going on at that level in terms of providing the Pacific perspective. That's that high-level stuff, and then at the same time we also want to try and gather our people at the grassroots level and ensure that they can actually have a pathway for those who wish to be more involved from the grassroots right through to that high-level strategic and governance roles. There are not many Pacific people involved in the whole, disability advocacy movement at the moment. So for those of us that are, we're really open to engaging with our youth, and they're quite welcome to come and contact us. They can, we're on Facebook, and we're on, there's a group called Aotearoa who are, involved in, who are basically a provider for Pacific Disabled as well as Levar.
Awesome. And music obviously has been a huge part of your life for your whole life. How has that tied in with your disability-related advocacy?
For me, being able to do music again was like a revelation, because I actually gave up music after my accident. I didn't want to play anymore because I thought, what's the point, because you're not going to play in front of people again. But in terms of what music can provide, I always believe not just music, but the arts itself is another way of expression, of advocating, of, providing a message that could really represent our disabled community in an artistic way to get the message across. So for me, knowing that music can do that, I was lucky enough to be able to do some recordings, and I recorded my own song and got that out there on YouTube, and got involved in some live performances, which really give me some good confidence. And I could see some of the young people who do things like gaming, or even some of those young ones who could rap or dance. I managed to get a dance group onto the Pacific Music Awards when I performed my song live last year. And music is another way of storytelling, of talking about our history and talking about our future. So yeah, I'm a strong believer in utilising music in terms of our advocacy work.
Awesome. Tell me a bit about your song. What was it called and what was it about?
The song I wrote was a song called Siva, which is Samoan for dance. It's just a way of expressing, bringing people together to, it's a song written by a disabled person, recorded, and there was a music video, and it was directed by myself as a disabled person, and we had a whole lot of disabled people who came on and started dancing. And it was a really upbeat, kind of funky, rocky type of song that could just show people that, hey, we might be broken, we might be disabled, but we can still dance and express ourselves in a way that's artistic and musical as well. Yeah, well, ultimately what I want to do is to record an album and bring in disabled people who wish, potential composers or performers, and bring them together with some of the producers from the music industry who can actually put those kind of words or what we compose into music, into like songs that are, like dance songs. So, and ultimately after that is if we can have a festival of disability arts that can basically like a week of disabled performances and gigs and people just coming in to have that focus.
I am loving that vision.
Thank you.
Very cool. Can you share when you're sort of not doing your advocacy work and when you kind of need a bit of a break from stuff, what are some of your hobbies?
Yeah, I guess for me, I'm a big rugby fan, so I still kind of do my little, Friday nights, Saturday nights, and also I found that when it comes to Friday night, I find it difficult to actually stay home. But yeah, I do a bit of playing and I think about some songwriting and just put some little ideas together, and it's all waiting for the next opportunity to put it out there.
Very cool. If you had some advice for your 20-year-old self or your younger self, for example, around about that time when you were seeing your school friend again and you were realising that he was in a wheelchair, and what would that be?
Probably don't buy a $2 bath mat. There was always something for me about not taking things for granted, and I realised that, I took a lot of things for granted, and I could always get things a lot easier without doing all the work. So it's just about appreciating the things that you need to do to aspire to what you want to be. Is not just a quick solution, not just think, I want to do this and suddenly you're there. It's putting in the hard yards, appreciating everything that you have, and then really appreciating what you do when you achieve what you set out to do.
In conversation with Pati Umaga. The music is Siva by June. Development and funding thanks to Imagine Better. Edited by Juliana Machado. Visual direction by Benjamin Brooking. Produced by Áine Kely-costello.